opportunity for us. Got it. It's being recorded. Really happy to be here and bring an opportunity to the Naturally New York community to dig in to some of the extraordinarily important nuts and bolts around supply chain management, logistics, and production. And I will launch by introducing myself and my fellow colleagues, JPG colleagues who are joining me here today. First and foremost, JPG is really proud to be a founding partner of Naturally New York, and I am also honored to be able to sit on the board and be as involved as I am in this really incredible organization. I'm a CPG, natural and organic channel food world veteran, and so I speak with some experience about how valuable this community can be, and really excited to bring this kind of learning opportunity to you all today. So I am a strategic advisor with JPG. I am here in New York. As you'll hear from my three colleagues here today, and I'll give a little bit of an overview of JPG more broadly. We're a team that's spread out around the country, but we do have myself and a team of 7 R&D folks here in the city as well. So we're physically and spiritually centered here in New York as much as we are anywhere else. Joe, do you want to give a little bit of a download on yourself?
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm glad to be with you this afternoon. And yeah, Joe Colyn. I'm an agronomist by training. Worked for about 20 years in the Kellogg Company doing product development, quality programs, and procurement supply chain work over that time. And then another 20 odd years in consulting in the space, primarily in the supply chain side of the food industry. And currently lead the co-man search practice and the procurement group at JPG, along with my colleague Paul, which I'll segue over to Paul right now.
Thanks, Joe. Yeah, thanks everybody for joining us today. Paul Vilker, been with JPG going on 3 years now. Over the last 10 years, I've held various leadership positions in supply chain and operations, most in CPG food, most recently helping a mid-scale snack company scale into mass retail and club accounts. So I'm excited to be with you. I do help co-lead our co-man solutions practice area, as Joe mentioned, as well as our supply chain management practice area alongside Rick. And happy to walk you through some of our insights, learnings, and expertise this afternoon. So thank you.
And I'm Rick Williams. I'll hop in here. Great to be here with you all and looking forward to our hour together. I've been in the food business for over 30 years. Started out on the manufacturing side with having founded an ingredient manufacturing businesses, which evolved into actually a CPG co-man business. So we manufacture branded products for other CPG companies. Sold that about 14 years ago and then joined a brand. So I have that background on the brand side, working and running operations and supply chain for a nutrition bar brand, growing it from 1 co-manufacturer to 4 before we exited and sold to PepsiCo. And then about 3.5 years ago, came on board with the team at JPG to be a part of the operations supply chain management group.
Fantastic. So just a moment to give a little bit of an overview of JPG broadly. As you can gather from Joe, Rick, and Paul's backgrounds, the JPG team is a deeply experienced group of folks who've been in the industry for decades, and collectively we're about at this point actually about 75 people on the team, all of whom have like I said, a deep base of experience in the industry from across a spectrum of different functional areas, starting with consumer insights and strategic thinking that would inform an R&D process, to that R&D formulation, product development process, to the manufacturing side. And that's where we're going to dig in today to help you all, regardless of where you are in your growth stage or your product development stage. We are here to be resources. And, again, it's a survey level conversation today. Happy to answer any questions that come up, and we are absolutely available for you afterwards as well for any other additional questions that you want to take offline. And without further ado, we'll get going with the start. Take it away.
Okay. All right. Thanks, Kara. I'll jump in first here. So we're going to compact a lot into an hour here. Joe and Paul and I will be kind of tag teaming our conversation, but each kind of taking a lead on certain aspects of supply chain that we'll be talking about here, but others jumping in as appropriate. We're looking forward to hearing more from you as well, as far as questions, your thoughts. Adrian and Carol will be monitoring the chat messages, and we're going to leave some time at the end of the hour for a Q&A period. So with that, just look at the overview of supply chain management and the way that we define it here, which is the management of flow of goods and services, including all processes to transform the raw material into final products. And a successful ops and supply chain solution assures consistent delivery on your promises to your consumers. So beginning with the end of mind is what's really important, and that is delivering an excellent product and compelling packaging with superior service to your consumers. That's what we want to accomplish with a solid supply chain program here. And we will discuss aspects of all parts of that, including, as shown on the slide here, beginning with procurement. And procurement of food items can be complex. You have many things to deal with there with regard to specifications, shelf life, how you handle the food, any special handling or temperature requirements there, as well as just getting it moved on a timely basis through your logistics program. So transportation and warehouses of those raw materials and packaging materials going into the manufacturing process. Whether you self-manufacture or use a contract manufacturer, we'll talk about the pros and cons of each there, and what things you should be paying attention to. And then finally, after that, looking at the movement of the finished goods from your manufacturing site to where you're going to be fulfilling orders through a warehouse distribution network there, to your distributors, to your retailers, and any direct-to-consumer business that you do. So go ahead, Kara, move to the next one. So supply chain may not be top of mind every day, but it really needs to be top of mind every day. And when you look at what founders generally reason to get into business is because you have a passion for your product that you want to bring to market. It's not because you really want to run a supply chain, but yet you need to be expert at that or have their expertise working with you to accomplish that. If you need to look at things that can happen on those days, including good and bad. Your sales could beat your forecast, outstripping your inventory, and leaving you in a position where you don't have production lined up to replenish. So you've got to deal with that. You could have a new account come on board that was not planned, that was unexpected, and you then need to support that with additional production through your supply chain program. Or some bad things that can happen, natural disasters, or a thing like a pandemic, which over the past 3 years, as we all know, has been quite impactful on supply chain. I would say the last 3 years have been the most challenging in the supply chain arena of my 30+ year career. So I think that we're coming out of that and have generally fared fairly well there. Additional things on the negative side that could happen is a recall. And that can be really devastating to a brand, even if it's not anything to do with what you did. Perhaps the supplier advises you that an ingredient that you used in your product is now subject to a recall, and you've already got product in distribution. How do you manage that? How do you deal with what that impact is going to have on your business? It can be very serious. When I ran a manufacturer, when we would have our periodic food safety training sessions with our team, I would call out names of companies and ask people if they'd heard of them. Most of them had not, because those were companies that went out of business because of a recall. So it's something that's very important to pay attention to from a food safety standpoint, and make sure you're protecting your product and your brand there. And I guess with that, I will turn it over to the next slide for, I think, Paul and Joe talk about manufacturing.
Paul, it's in your court.
Yeah, thanks. So I guess this is a question that most brands struggle with in the beginning, which is, how do I know if contract manufacturing is the right move? I think a lot of times the number one key consideration that brands face versus self-production is, well, I guess one of the key benefits of contract manufacturing is the low capital investment to get started, right? So that's one consideration, but there's also others that you can see here that we've outlined for the group, which I'll take a moment to discuss each. I won't spend too much time. So again, feel free to send your questions through and we can follow up after the conversation. But a lot of it is understanding where your strengths and weaknesses are. What's the best use of my time? So how do you determine where you want to spend and how you want to spend it to grow your business? A lot of time, we use the phrase a lot with our brands. You want to allow us to spend time in the business while you spend the time growing the business. So how is it that you want to allocate your bandwidth towards the specific needs? Of course, working capital, like I mentioned already, what's the best use of your money? There may be, it may be a little bit more expensive. More often than not, it is more expensive on a per unit basis to produce at a contract manufacturer than self-production. But again, it's a low capital investment to partner strategically with a service provider that can produce your product. Also, you can determine the benefit of leveraging that contract manufacturer with that expertise that they have. So do you retain those competencies in-house to successfully operate a manufacturing facility? So where are your strengths at? Is that something that you believe is the right pathway for your business? Of course, compliance, certification, food safety. There's quite a bit involved to ensure that if you were to self-produce, for example, to maintain compliance and regulatory measures to ensure that you're aligned with your third-party audit or any food safety mandates by the state government entities to ensure that you're operating a compliant food facility. Again, if you go to a contract manufacturing facility or organization, that's not something that you need to maintain. Of course, it's important to understand what it is, but more than likely they will have that figured out. And of course, if you're invested or if you're funded, what are those stakeholders comfortable with? So is it typically from an advisory perspective, you should have a strategic relationship with those folks to understand what the best use and the best plan is for your business model.
Paul, would you say that there's a different weight or prioritization among these various sort of silos, depending on the category or, whether something is perishable, non-perishable? Are there different ways to think about these things based on the actual features of the product or characteristics of the product?
It's a great question. I think I don't think so. I think it comes down to what your business model is, what your strategy, what your value proposition is for your particular product. I will say the largest barrier to entry into self-production is, again, a capital. So I think there's a strong financial consideration here in determining what you want to do. A lot of times if you self-produce, control is the number one consideration, right? You have control over your, when and how you produce. You have control over the amount of inventory that you can invest in. You have control over the facility and what's coming in and out of it. You have control over food safety programs. So there's if that's your part of your model, that's the one thing I'd say that's the top consideration if you want to self-produce. Now, you may be bootstrapping and you have no choice, right? Maybe the contract manufacturing market may not support the level of product that you need on an annualized, monthly, weekly basis. So it's, you're putting the sweat equity in at a commercial kitchen, for example, and growing it that way. So the micro or macroeconomic factors may push you into self-production as well.
I think we'll get into this, but I know for a lot of the companies that are part of the Naturally New York community, they are in that very early stage and therefore end up struggling, I think, probably most mightily with things like cost of goods, cost of ingredients, cost of packaging, cost of line time, not having any leverage with the co-packer.
Yep.
So I know that's, what we're going to get into, but.
Sure.
Yeah.
Joe, did you have something? It looked like you were itching.
I think, Paul, I appreciate your point about bootstrapping, because there's going to have to be some early self-production to validate the concept and all that stuff. And we understand that a lot of folks in our audience today are probably in that space. Hopefully what we can share with you, even as we go through this, is a little bit more about why it's important to think about, should you self-manufacture or would you better leverage the assets of a contract manufacturer as you grow your business. And quite frankly, I think a lot of times it gets down to what's the best use of your capital and your investors' capital and your time. And contract manufacturers can bring a lot of expertise to that. But I don't want to get too far ahead of our presentation, so maybe I'll go back to you, Paul.
Good segue.
Yeah.
Good segue to the next page.
Yep.
Yeah, so I think I touched on this briefly in the previous slide, but it's true, a lot of times when you're planning your business, there's always a strat plan session or a SWOT analysis, right, on what your resources in-house and internally are able to accomplish, and where do you need to leverage outside or external or anything, or who do you need to hire, who do you need to bring on to ensure that you have a robust team to support, again, the model and the goal of your organization. So you really need to know, where your strengths lie. If you come out of operations and you've been an operator for, your career, or have experience there, and you understand what it takes to run a manufacturing facility, and this is, you feel passionate about that, then by all means, that's something that you should do. If you're a great marketer, great, grow your business in that way and leverage the resources appropriately to ensure that you can produce your product, that as efficiently as you can to support your business. So again, where is your time best spent? Typically we advise whatever your strengths are is where you should spend your time in, and then leverage outside help to mitigate, or not mitigate, but I guess to supplement the areas that you may not be the best at. Of course, knowing what your product is. So what, from a formulation perspective, development, ongoing maintenance, do you have a product that requires, some sort of novel processing technology that would require unique equipment, for example, that may need, that the contract manufacturing market may not have, is always something to consider, right? Where there may be additional needs to support the production process but also, you know, if there's any unique ingredient formulation requirements that may push you in one direction or another, right? And then, of course, you know, be aware of the risk, self-production. And I'm thinking, again, I'm using the example of like creating your own facility to produce, you know, it's again, a high capital investment. So depending if you're funded or not, it may be a discussion that you have with your investors on if that's the best use of your money and your capital, and how do you best mitigate the risk. So I will give you an example too. You know, the organization that I worked for previous to JPG was in a similar stage as many of you have been in their journey, where they started making product in their kitchen, right? And they slowly but surely made their way into self-manufacturing. And they decided that their main decision point from making the bars in their kitchen to now extruding 50,000 units a day over the course of the last 10 years was they wanted to maintain control, right? They didn't want to rely on a contract manufacturer because there's risks involved there in terms of, hey, we want to scale quickly. We want to grow to a point where we can scale up in a timely manner if we do catch a large account. So there's pros and cons there. So I just want to give you a personal example of where some of my experience lie, which again supports some of the growth, or some of the it supports the stage that some of you may be in now. So part of what we do, again, on a daily basis is we work with brands to help find them the right manufacturer. So JPG has established a very robust methodology and process to support brands' needs. So typically, you know, just to give you a high-level overview, we align on parameters of the ask, and then we kind of set those parameters out to the market to see who can meet them. So a lot of, you know, the vast majority is who has the capability, right? Like you need to match the processing technology with your particular product. So of course you want to look for somebody who can do that. Secondly is who has the time to do it, right? So capacity at a co-manufacturer is a key consideration if you're able to get on the line or not. So do they have time to produce your product? This is the most elusive as well as the most changing element in the co-manufacturing market is capacity. Customers come and go. There's new lines that are being commissioned and coming on board. So the capacity question is always changing. I think Joe would agree. I mean, you could go into, we could be looking for a manufacturer for a particular product in February, and we're not finding any capacity, but then we touch on it again in August, and then it's like quite a bit has changed, right? Where the players may not be so much different, but the capacity, you know, may be available, right? Joe, I don't know if you have anything.
Yeah, and I think one other thing to say about capacity is that really it's a matter of finding the right contract manufacturer at the scale of the business that you're at. So somebody that can produce economically at, you know, maybe you're at a smaller scale and you don't need as much capacity if you're introducing a new bar to the market as Kellogg might need for Nutri-Grain, for example. And so we always factor that into how we're looking for and who we're talking to and bringing forward to our clients the right fit at the right scale for your business, because that's so important to a couple of things. One is keeping the attention of your co-man, really fitting into their business model. You know, do the two businesses fit together well?
Can you take a moment and maybe, if it's possible, to give a couple of examples of instances where either in your own experience working with brands or with JPG clients, is it possible to, like, if a client has a very specific vision for their ingredient deck, how often do you find yourselves counseling folks to think about massaging some of those parameters in order to tee them up better for this co-man conversation? Or, are there instances where it is totally reasonable to kind of stick to your guns with
Sure.
respect to ingredients?
Yeah. What we like to do is when we're in early dialogue with the clients, the brands, about what's important to your brand, what are the must-haves and what are the nice-to-haves. So, for example, sometimes you might wish to bring an organic product to the market, but if certain ingredients are not available as organic in the quantity that you need, then we may guide you to say, hey, consider that, or how important is it to your customer base, your consumer base? And that also does tie back to the contract manufacturing community, because certain plants will deal with certain allergens or not deal with certain allergens. And we have to know that going into the discussion too. So, if non-GMO, for example, is optional for you, that gives us more latitude to look at more facilities that could make your product than if you had an absolute hard requirement for a facility that could guarantee that they were not using any of those types of products in their facility, and there was no risk of cross contamination, for example. So that's all part of the early dialogue we want to have, to know what are your must-to-haves and what are your nice-to-haves.
Also, too, we when we're searching, or if you feel free to take this methodology in your own searches, what are you learning from the conversations you're having with your co-manufacturer that may provide or may create an input to your decision making on what that ingredient deck should look like too. So I would advise it's almost, how would you approach that conversation? And we advise, have a little bit of an open mind, because there's always going to be a little bit of validation work regardless of what your ingredient deck looks like. It's gonna, the contract manufacturer's goal is to get your formula through their system, and they typically have a really good idea of what that would look like. Doesn't necessarily mean there's going to be a wholesale change to your ingredient deck or anything, but there may need to be some tweaks there to ensure that, again, it can flow through their system appropriately and efficiently. And we would highly recommend that you're open to those conversations, because at the end of the day, they're both the goal of manufacturers is that you both win. So another point here I want to touch on is, do you think you're ready for co-manufacturing, right? So selecting the right co-manufacturer is also, am I ready for co-manufacturing? And, if I'm being, Joe might smile at this, but the reality of co-manufacturing is it's a volume-driven business. A lot changed during COVID, right? Where pre-COVID, it was, I would say the appetite for innovation was a little bit higher than it is now. And certainly during COVID, manufacturers stuck with what they know. I think we're all pretty well aware of what happened to grocery level item demand because people weren't eating in restaurants. So you can imagine these manufacturers were inundated with orders. So they stuck, and that's just the reality of the cyclical nature of our economy. And when things like a pandemic happens, so they were, again, they're focused on their top customers. I think we're coming out of that now, where manufacturers are a little bit more open now to working with smaller brands and innovating and seeing a pathway towards, frankly, them growing to a point where it would benefit the manufacturer as much as it's benefiting the brand. But again, it's, if any of you have gone down this path, and certainly I'm sure most of you will eventually, finding a co-manufacturer and being ready for co-manufacturing typically lines up with what your volumes are. So a lot of times if you begin these conversations, they're going to ask, what's your annualized volume? That's going to be one of the first questions they ask you. And I guess a standard rule of thumb is, it's like, okay, you are ready now. What's that look like? They typically, a co-manufacturer is going to want to run at minimum once a quarter. So that's typically what we advise our clients. So if whatever their minimum is, try and produce once a quarter with them. That way you minimize the risk of either A, getting bumped from one of their top manufacturers, or B, being deprioritized. And so I just wanted to touch on that as you begin your co-man journey. Two other pieces, just real quick. Location, obviously, is probably a key consideration to your other strategic partners in your supply chain. That's something to consider as you begin your search, or at least begin thinking about what a co-man partnership may look like. And then, of course, as you're vetting them, are you getting a good gut feel? We call it the cool factor. You know, what are we thinking about them, and how do we think that they could work well with you when we're searching for our clients? And that can be equally as important, right? But anyways, I know we're getting close, so I want to allow enough time so we can go on to the next slide. I think this was feeding into what I was already talking about too. Like you have to have and also what Kara's question was, you have to understand your product, obviously. Go into it with a little bit of an open mind. Things may change a little bit, not a lot. And sometimes you need to stick with your guns too, right? It's like, I really know my product, and if it can get through the system in this way, and you're meeting the requirements of the co-manufacturer, there's no need to adjust. As Joe mentioned, prioritize your needs. We always approach our client conversations when we're trying to find them a manufacturer. What are the must-haves? What are the nice-to-haves? Throughout the engagement of when we're looking for a manufacturer, we bring those learnings, and those must-haves and nice-to-haves may adjust over time. So again, we always advise to have a little bit of an open mind. And then when it comes to the MSA, here stands for manufacturing service agreement. So that's typically your contract that you agree to with your manufacturer. So often they may, at a smaller size, such as some of the folks on the call here, they may require you to spot buy from them until you can prove market viability or prove that you are going to be a sustainable customer for the manufacturer. So, long-term MSA or contract may not be needed. It may be a base PO, whatever is agreed in the PO. But over time, you want to develop terms for that relationship, right? You're basically getting married. And you need to ensure that there's well-defined parameters within that contract that, protect, both parties, but also protects you, like your IP, which is your formula. If there's any processing technology that's unique to you, protecting that, any guarantees or any warranties that are in there for your finished goods in the event that the manufacturer screws up, frankly. So, there's areas within a contract with the manufacturer that you definitely need to ensure are well outlined.
We had a question in the chat around volume projections, and especially for an early stage business where those numbers might fluctuate. Is the expectation that you share immediate term volume numbers, and to what degree, I guess, would you be held to your more extended term, couple years out kind of volume numbers?
Yeah, great question. So the way that we do is we ask for their year 1 and year 2 volumes, right? And that's typically what a manufacturer will ask for. So yes, they do, and they care about where you're going and what where you project to be at a certain point in time. They also are vetting customers, and they want to make sure that you're a good partner for them as much as you want to make sure they're a good partner for you. So it's also common where they require a forecast. So having a contract manufacturing relationship actually creates robustness in your internal business operations, because it pushes you in a way where it's like, how am I actually thinking about this? Where am I going? What's my plan? Am I going into retail, or am I staying in e-commerce to learn? Am I being approached by a large retailer where I need to scale up? So it's like, it may not be fun doing it, but from a long-term perspective, working with a manufacturer when they request a forecast, for example, can benefit your organization long-term.
Kara, I think one other thing to think about here, the MSA, that acronym we use under the third bullet there, is the manufacturing services agreement, the agreement that you put in place between yourself and the contract manufacturer. And in that, it's always wise to formalize when there might be reviews on things like the performance of the contract manufacturer, the volumes that you need, the quantity you need, And, you know, and when you start a deal like that, you may want to do it as soon as 3 or 6 months. And then, you know, annually, and then maybe once you get into a steady business on maybe a little less frequent basis. But those reviews allow you to have the conversation with the contract manufacturer as the dynamics of your business change, because a forecast is a forecast, right? And we know it's going to change. So the better prepared you are to communicate that with your contract manufacturer, the better the relationship's going to be.
I see John had a comment here that I want to touch on, and very good point. He was saying that his experience has been that as long as you explain your sales strategy and essentially where you're going to go, to, you know, that supports the conversations that you have with your manufacturer, and that's absolutely true. So at this stage, manufacturers are going to be very keen to understand what your demand plan is, and they are going to ask those questions. So being prepared to answer that is equally important.
And how is sort of tacking along on that? I think, you know, one of the scenarios you hear batted about a lot is that situation where you're growing your business, it's chugging along according to plan, and then all of a sudden you happen to get a call from a Walmart or a Target or, you know, some entity that would represent a significant increase in volume that you hadn't really anticipated. And then the question becomes, well, what does this mean for my organization? And what does it mean in your experience for a lot of smaller businesses and their relationships with their co-manufacturers? Is it something that's, you know, that's surmountable and manageable, or is it something that really, you know, maybe you should contemplate saying no for now? Thank you. Can I come back to you in 6 months or a year?
Yeah, you have to have the conversation in both directions, right? Back to your supplier and to the marketplace. I will say that, you know, as you have that conversation with your contract manufacturer, and you know that they may be limited in capacity, it might be astute to you know, look at the marketplace again and say, who else could I use as a secondary, or who could be the relief valve for, you know, twice as many bars as I thought I needed for next year. A fraction of the searches we do annually are specifically for clients that are just trying to understand the landscape and know what their options are in case something like that hits. So there's ways to build a relief valve into your supply chain as well, and we can help with that. But it always starts with the right conversation and the right relationship with your current co-man, because he may be willing to build out capacity, and he may have to talk to his machinery suppliers to say, can I get them in time to build, you know, to own this piece of business? And so again, communication is just so important in all of this.
So in supply chain terminology, we, you know, with Rick's group, when we are supporting the business's ops and supply chain as an extension of their team, that falls under what we call a sales and operations planning process. So it falls into the methodology of communicating across the entities and strategic partners of your organization to ensure that everybody's talking. So to your point, Kara, it's like, hey, we have Walmart coming on. What the hell do we do? Your co-manufacturer should already have an idea that Walmart could be coming, right? Your ingredient suppliers should have an idea that Walmart could be coming. And so if you follow the principle of aligning your strategic partners, which is a key characteristic of a sound sales and operations planning process, that at the very least, each of your partners have an idea, right? So then you can start having the conversations and planning towards how can we work up to that point. And to Joe's point, sometimes it's, hey, you know, my manufacturer doesn't have the capacity. So now I have to, you know, find somebody else. But, you know, we strongly advise our clients to have that conversation first. So if you have a rogue salesperson, they sell it, it's not a good thing, right? Like, make sure you're having conversations with your sales team. They're bringing back their learnings and potential opportunities to you on a weekly or monthly basis. So at least you're capturing what can happen or what should be happening. That way you can proactively have a conversation with your manufacturer. Because even if your manufacturer doesn't have capacity right now, following that process of working towards scaling, for example, into mass retail, they may have the capacity in the next few months, for example. So it may, again, I think my point is strong communication, align with your strategic partners, and you should be able to work towards that eventually.
Very wise. All right, moving on.
Yeah, I'll jump in here just to chat a little bit about ingredients and knowing what your ingredients are. So your ingredient type, the supply and the ability to get those ingredients to make your food are critically important to your success. So when you're sourcing ingredients, you always need to know, what's the availability, particularly if you're into novel food space and creating something that, quote, no one's ever seen before. Are you using a novel ingredient that is, it may have a very limited supply base, and can the suppliers, can they meet your needs, your forecast? So be aware of that, particularly if you're in unique spaces. If you're working with, bread flour, there's probably lots of it on the face of the earth. But if you're working with, ground lizard teeth or something like that, that's really unique, you need to make sure that there's somebody that can actually produce it at the volume you need. And that's a little bit of a tongue-in-cheek example, but you have to keep that in mind. Grass, generally recognized as safe, particularly again if you're working with novel ingredients. This is a set of standards, ingredients that are used in the industry conventionally meet that GRAS requirements, but this is all about food safety. And if you're working with novel ingredients, will they pass that standard? You can take new ingredients and self-verify them as generally recognized as safe, but you typically need to have some data to support that the item is safe for use in food. And then just pulling an ingredient off the shelf at Costco and using it is one thing, but as you get into a commercial food business, you really need to be able to surround the total specifications and certificates of analysis for the product and know what it is and what it does for you, and being able to translate that into a commercial ingredient that can be sourced through a commercial supply chain at scale. Just something to be aware of as you continue to build out your business from the kitchen table forward, I guess I'll say it that way. And then there's always the question about compliance to certifications, whether they're USDA regulations if you're working with a meat product, or if it's certifications that you require, like organic. If you want to have an organic product, do your ingredients meet the certification requirements, and other things like food safety. You may hear of terms like SQF, safe quality food, and there are certifying agencies out there that verify this, and you just want to make sure that your ingredients meet those requirements and match up to the requirements of your contract manufacturer and what they will accept into their facilities. And then Paul's already talked about, volume and minimum order quantities for ingredients, shelf life for ingredients. Shelf life is an interesting one because, your ingredient may have a 1-year shelf life, but you want to be using it kind of before that year is up so that it's still fresh in the context of your finished food. So you want to work with, you want to understand the shelf life of the product and how does that fit with your production schedule and the shelf life of the finished food as well. So there's a lot of moving parts here, but we just wanted to kind of highlight them here with a few bullets, things to think about as you build out your business. And just one real quick thing, your vendors and your contract manufacturer can always be part of this, should always be part of this conversation, because they'll be able to supply a lot of the information and guide you through this as well. So just on ingredients, a couple things to consider. The feasibility of the ingredients. Can you make and scale your product using the desired ingredients? Paul referenced earlier, sometimes you want to have that conversation with your co-man about, is it going to work in your facility? Another benefit of working with contract manufacturers is that they may have some standard ingredients on the floor of their facility. For example, a wheat flour, if your product contains wheat, that they could leverage their volume and do a volume buy where your price would be better if you had to buy, compared to buying it yourself and putting it into your own factory. So there's opportunity as well in this whole area of understanding how to grow your business and how to scale with a contract manufacturer. Knowing your product priorities will help you in selecting the right supplier. So what's the most important ingredients? What are the things that are must-haves, need-to-haves? Can you work with a different cinnamon, for example, that might still do the trick in your product? It may not be the same one you use on the benchtop, but it opens up avenues as far as vendors. So some things to think about. And then use proper metrics to organize your process. Measure and record your needs will streamline the sourcing process. So I'll share one thought there, and that is, you may just be buying product initially on a spot market, picking up the product when you need it, calling a broker or distributor and saying, hey, I need a pallet full of this or something like that. But you want to be measuring and tracking and looking at your business to say, hey, when should I be looking at contracting instead of just buying on a spot basis? That may get you better pricing. It certainly will probably help you get better predictability into your supply chain. So a couple of things to think about there as you build up the ingredient side of the business. And I think we can probably move on from there, Kara, unless there's any questions right now.
We also have just a time check. We have about 10 minutes left. So maybe we can zoom through the last couple of pages and still have a couple of minutes at the end for some Q&A.
Yeah, so I think we're over to Rick right now, right? Yeah.
I think it's Paul here.
Oh, yes, it is Paul.
Yeah.
That's right. Sorry. I'll just touch briefly on this. So with manufacturing, with ingredient supply, comes inventory management of both your, again, your ingredient supply and your finished goods. So this slide here is showing what, I guess, the trifecta is for you to try and manage, which is tools and supply. If you've worked with anybody who's a supply chain lifey, tools are highly important to the day-to-day work that they do. So understanding what that looks like and your options out there are going to be incredibly important as you scale your business. Just to give you an example, JPG is in the middle of that now with tools that we're using to help optimize some of our client supply chain management needs. So everybody should be looking at that, including service providers like us. Forecasting, of course, is important. In a contract manufacturing model, you have to have a forecast because you're building inventory to support your business. You're not, your customers are pulling from your base of inventory. So typically there needs to have some level of what we in supply chain terminology is weeks of supply. How much do you actually need at any given point? And then the key inputs, which is anything that else is driving your business to impact or positively or negatively what your inventory should look like. I kind of touched on this. If this slide is going out, Kara, I don't think I need to touch too much on this, but it's essentially what I was saying before. Make sure you're aligned across your organization. Make sure your strategic partners are understanding what your needs are. There's a strong cash position in this, right? If you're contract manufacturing, you're going to be spending money to build that inventory. So you need to ensure that the ROI of that inventory built is there. Understand your process, what your supply chain actually looks like in terms of distribution and where your customers are purchasing it. Again, focus on your forecast. You can't get out of that in a contract manufacturing relationship. You're going to be building inventory that your customers are going to be pulling from. So you have to have a really strong understanding of what that's going to be, because the more inventory you build, the less cash you're going to have. Then, of course, people, you have to have the right team, the right set of resources. Of course, JPG is here if you need help, but understanding that areas that you may need support in terms of talent, make sure that you're approaching that with an open mind. And I'm sorry if I'm rushing here. I think this is.
Yeah, I'll jump in here and I'll rush too. The last two things we want to talk about were logistics and COGS and margin management. So whipping through our quadrant here, identifying your needs. It's important to understand. I'm going to focus on finished goods logistics here right now. Are you going to be shipping your products in full pallet loads? Are you going to be shipping them in mixed pallets of different SKUs or partial pallets? Or are you going to be shipping via small parcel, individual cases, or bundled cases? Understanding that helps you identify who can be your best partner to help with that. Do you need climate control, whether it be frozen, refrigerated, or even just air conditioned? If you're shipping chocolate chip cookies or nutrition bars that have chocolate, you don't want them to bloom because their warehouse got too hot. As far as the second item, looking for the right partners, you're generally not going to be self-distributing. You're going to be using partners. And so looking at your warehouse, look at location, where you're manufacturing, where's your customer base? How can you best support them? What's the access that the warehouse provides you? Do they have a portal where you can get real-time information on your inventory levels, on shipment status? Do they have a WMS system, a warehouse management system that you can access? What are their capabilities with regard to picking the types of orders that you need picked if it's a mixed order? Do you need kitting capabilities as far as doing variety packs for direct to consumer, or club packs if you're going in that channel? And what's their capacity? Do they have the capability to support the business level that you need supported? And then looking at their charges with regard to how every time they touch your product, they're going to charge you for it. So you need to get the rate sheet, you need to compare the different options and try to come up with what you think your costs of fulfillment are going to be for these orders, and get references from them. Talk to people who work with them. They'll give you good references, but you can certainly dig deeper, and we can give you some ideas on how to do that to find out if there are issues. As far as with carriers, looking at, are you going to be shipping full truckload, LTL, less truckload, most likely, and use of freight brokers is very effective in trying to get the right freights for your people. Small parcel, shop it out. Get bids from the different, the UPS, the FedEx, the USPS, and they'll compete with each other and get you the best fulfillment price that you need. And as far as optimizing, look at your geography, as I mentioned before. Where's your manufacturer? Where's your customer base? What are the freight lanes that you're going to be using? So what's the most efficient from that standpoint? And what's the 3PL landscape where you're going to be? If you're going to be in the Midwest, Chicago's got a plethora of options there. In the Northeast, Pennsylvania is within a few hours of massive population centers there. So just depends on where you're selling and what your needs are there. We can pop on to the next one, Kara. And this is kind of a summary here, looking at supply chain management. You need to get the right product to the right place at the right time and right cost, and which is simple, but execution can be complex. And as Paul mentioned, it requires organizational support, and it may not be your wheelhouse, but we talk about allowing you to be on the business. We can be in the business, or you get the right people to be in the business so that you're not focusing on the supply chain issues every single day. And getting comfortable with creative problem solving. It's not just marketing people that have to be creative. Supply chain people do too. And we face it every day with finding the right solutions to the issues that we're facing with there. And certainly cool heads do prevail. Shouting generally doesn't help, but communication does. And make sure your communication upstream and downstream with your partners so that everybody's in the know as you're trying to work through the issues of supply chain management. And go on to the next slide there, Kara.
Just real quick, there was one question in the chat about how shelf life of the product itself informs all of this.
And that's a great question, and it certainly does inform that. With regard to how much inventory you want to carry, what sort of days forward coverage do you carry in order to make sure that you're maintaining shelf life, not just for the shelf life of your product, but many distributors have a requirement that when you ship to them, it has to have 75% of the shelf life left on it. So if you've got a year shelf life, you've only got really 3 months to ship it out to your customer. So you need to manage everything accordingly to make sure that you're not, aging out product. That
You have
then
to have
just start.
that visibility from the retailer too. Obviously, depending on the type of product and the velocity in the category, the retailer is going to have certain expectations around shelf life also. So you kind of have to work backwards from the amount of shelf life you need to have once it hits the retail shelf.
It's also a factor of your, it's one input into your strategy, right? Like, is your production partner building an inventory for you to pull, or are they building to order, right? If you have something that's fresh, like a bakery item in retail, you don't have that much time to get it to, unless it's frozen, right? But I'm just trying to give you an example of it's one consideration that actually it has a wide ranging impact across your supply chain.
And looking at COGS and margin, it's really important that you produce your products to an investable margin, that you can get the types of return that you need in order to invest further in your business, whether it be trade spend, marketing, whatever there. And so building out that, it's important that you build out a BOM, and I'm not saying be a tariff, but rather a bill of materials that you can use to really itemize what the cost factors are. And you then have visibility to what the triggers are to optimize, what items are really driving those costs. How can you help address the problem areas? And then collaborate with your partners, whether it be your suppliers, your co-manufacturer, and your logistics provider, to find out what can we do better and how can we work better with you as a partner to help drive down costs collaboratively and keep that under control. And
Rick, would you agree that a standard rule of thumb to drive towards in CPG food is like 40%?
It really depends on the category, I think, but I think that is a good rule of thumb, at least to start with there, and then start looking at what your real business needs are there. And some things too, when you start out, you're not going to hit those sorts of margins, frankly, but you need to look at it from a standpoint, do you have scalability that you have a pathway and visibility to that pathway to hit that margin. So initially you may have to operate at lesser margins and think of that as a growth marketing cost to get to the level that you need to be to have a sustainable business model.
All right.
So, yeah, maybe we should just go ahead and move on to questions here.
Well, we've got 30 seconds left, I think.
Okay.
Just under the wire.
We did just receive a couple more questions. What is included and excluded in gross margin? And I'm sorry, would someone like to take that one?
Sure. Generally speaking, it's the inputs. So cost of materials, logistics to your manufacturing cost, packaging costs, anything to get it to the point where you can move it to your customer. So directly into the product there.
That's materials, labor, any overhead costs, and obviously anything that your contract manufacturer charges you. But to Rick's point, anything that's actually being, I guess a good way to think about it is like any inputs or resources that are working on the product, right, to value add. That's typically your cost of goods sold, and that impacts your margins.
And the last question in the chat is just coming back to an earlier part of the conversation. When would you advise a brand to evaluate self-manufacturing after having been working with a co-packer for some period of time?
Good question. Wow. Yeah, there's that's kind of loaded. There's a lot of stuff there. You want a very, very stable business before you're going to build your own plant. I guess I would say that way, and enough scale to make it pay. So you're doing an analysis then of this is what it costs me to work with this contract manufacturer on either a toll or turnkey basis. And I think I can build my own place. Quite frankly, a lot of brands never get there because they don't really ever want to be running their own operations because it's not core to the company's business. And even if you look at a lot of Fortune 50s today, they are trending towards outsourcing more of the manufacturing and being brand owners, and maybe not running as many of their own plants, certainly not on new businesses. So we've worked with clients that are 100, 200, $500 million companies, and they're still going to co-manufacture all their product because they built solid relationships. They've done all the right things as far as building those relationships out. They're comfortable with the cost of goods and they work to the margins that they need. So yeah, a lot of companies will be in that contract manufacturing space forever. I think of it simply this way. If you're a founder and if you're a company, you've got really three things to take care of: the finances, the demand side, which is marketing and sales, and the operations side. Typically, you can be really good at two of those and maybe not all three. And quite often for people that are passionate about brands, it's not necessarily operations. So that's why contract manufacturers, and that's why the contract manufacturing space has grown so much in the last 30 years. There's people that love to hunker down in a plant and make stuff for you if you have a way of selling it.
There also has got to be some level of ROI. So to give you like a tangible answer, it's, if you have, if you're saving 7 cents per unit by producing on your own, what's the ROI for that to build your own facility or start building that capacity out on your own? So there's, of course, a financial consideration there.
And one last question was what about the opposite of that scenario? So I think that's where we started, the idea of moving from your home kitchen to a commercial kitchen where you're self-producing to a co-packer. I think ultimately that all comes down to volume and being able to understand where your volume's coming from and how reliable, how stable that might be, how able you feel to be certain about projections going into the future. I think too, and to be able to work within the parameters that co-packers have to be stable businesses on their end as well. And that's something that I guess just to kind of wrap it up, that is, you all have gotten a pretty fantastic taste today of the insights that the JPG team can bring to the table. And we do this for companies of all sizes. So even again, knowing that the naturally community, a lot of the businesses are just starting out in very early stages. We can help you as well as we can the biggest companies that we also work with. So happy to explore what that could look like if that might make sense. If you want to go deeper into the details of your own business, also happy to take that offline.
Thank you everyone so much again today for joining us. Thank you to JPG and this fabulous team for their incredible advice. We're going to route the presentation, share the recording and the contact info shortly. So we'll see you at the next event. Thank you all so much again.
Thanks, Adrian.
Thanks.